Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem, not very well spoken of often, What Ship Puzzled at Sea, the poem number 10 of the 18 of Whispers of Heavenly Death. However, I find this an amazing little poem, especially when we join it to the very early inscriptions poems we saw, of course, in Cabin Ships at Sea. We saw this poem very early on in Leaves of Grass, the deathbed edition. And we're going to comment on the idea of the invitation that Whitman is always giving, right? This is one of those, again, come poems, those inviting poems, so we're going to see that. Now, speaking of that, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, and that you have worked all the way through all of our poems. That's our hope, including a set of introductory comments for Whispers, and of course, we just finished with Music Always Round Me. Our Nortons will inform us that this poem, in 1860, the first four lines of Calamus number 31, but in Leaves of Grass 1867, a separate poem entitled Here, Sailor, and so also in the present cluster, in Passage to India supplements, in Leaves of Grass 1871 and Two Rivulets of 1876. The present title, we're told, appeared in Leaves of Grass 1881. I find it fascinating that the word puzzled gets used one time in all Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. I also find it interesting that the word curious is such a central word, as we've commented a number of times already in our study, such a central word. Let's look at this little four-line brief poem. And again, as we've said so many times before in our study of Leaves of Grass, we don't want to miss where this poem is placed. Notice, right after the Music Always Round Me, and right before the last probably real popular poem in Leaves of Grass, that edition, Noiseless Patient Spider, a poem that we'll get to shortly. What ship puzzled at sea? What ship puzzled at sea cons for the true reckoning, or coming in to avoid the bars and follow the channel a perfect pilot needs? Here, sailor, here, ship, take aboard the most perfect pilot, whom, in a little boat, putting off and rowing, I, hailing you, offer. Now, the syntax is strange in this little poem, and I think that Whitman is playing interesting games to put this one in Whispers of Heavenly Death for reasons that we will get to in a moment. But notice right away, we have two quasi-rhetorical questions. What ship puzzled at sea? Now, this idea of a ship at sea, we've seen all the way through Leaves of Grass. We obviously think of, oh, Captain, my Captain. Cons is only used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. This idea of cons, to study, you can hear it in concentrate, right? To study attentively, to look at. Cons for the true reckoning. Now, there's only two other uses of the word reckoning. Old Man's Thought of School and Passage to India 8. This idea of the reckoning, the ending, if we can think about it that way. But I want to concentrate on the word true, because we're going to go from true to perfect. And his use of the word perfect in Leaves of Grass is significant. We'll get there in a moment. Notice, he'll say it this way, or coming in, notice again the use of the word come, coming in to avoid the bars and follow the channel a perfect pilot needs, question mark. Again, the syntax is a little bit strange here. In other words, if you think about dying as sailing, and you think about coming into the harbor, and how well you want to do that to avoid certain kinds of the bars, that is to say the sand that might be there on the beach, what kind of a perfect pilot do you need? Now, this idea of perfection and perfect, used over 90 times in Leaves of Grass. So think about the power of that fact. We'll come back to it here especially again. In other words, if the ship is trying to figure out, puzzling how to get into the harbor, what kind of a perfect pilot does one hope for? Now he comes back to it. Here, sailor, here, ship. Notice the exclamation points. After two question marks, two exclamation points. The balance is nice. Take aboard the most perfect pilot, whom in a little boat, putting off and rowing, I, hailing you, offer. Now, what exactly is this perfect pilot? Well, some have argued that Whitman himself is calling himself the perfect pilot. I don't think so. I think what he's arguing is that Leaves of Grass, the book, what in the very last poem of Deathbed Edition he'll call his fancy, I think he's making the argument, what? Well, I think he's making the argument that if one is going to do this thing called living, then one must do this thing called dying, ergo being in the cluster called Whispers of Heavenly Death. And when it comes time to die, what is it that you will want to help you, to guide you through the experience? I think his argument is the offering. Again, this is one of those invitation poems. Offering. Well, offering of what? Well, I think it's Leaves of Grass. I think that Whitman genuinely believed that Leaves of Grass, as a collection of poems, is how one best prepares for not only living but also for dying, which is, of course, two sides for him of the same coin. At 2a, then, I think the messaging here is simple. Poetry is a great way to prepare for one's passing, for one's shipping, for one's going. At 2b, I love his use of the word perfect. I love his use of the word true. This idea that it keeps coming up again and again, the idea of perfect or perfection in Leaves of Grass as well is interesting to me. At 3, we mentioned, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." Think about how there it's the great Lincoln who has not been able to guide the ship of state and come back alive. But notice here, he's going to offer a different kind of pilot, the pilot of language, if you will. Now, how are we going to own a poem like this? Well, I find this a fascinating question. If you had the control to be able to determine what you would be listening to when you flatline, when you finally do die, what would be that poem, and why would you choose that poem? Or maybe for you it's a song off your playlist. Who knows, for maybe some of us, it will be, in fact, a Whitman set of lines. Thank you.